But tonight, the big kicker is Comet Elenin. I mean, this is a topic that is coming back with a passion. And, excuse me, Bill, we're getting some hiss in the background.
I can hear that too.
Okay.
I don't think.
Did it
I'm
just
not sure
start?
whose phone
My
that
air
is coming
conditioner.
from.
Pardon?
Now it's gone.
Now it's gone. Okay.
Excellent.
It's probably my air conditioner.
Aha, all right. All right. Well, first off, you know, since we published our article on Yowza, I put up a substantial article on the Tara code, and we've been following this thing. The interesting part about Comet Elenin right now is that this whole situation is really reminding me a lot of what happened in 2003, but with some very big twists, some very big differences. Back in 2003, that was the Nancy Leader non-event. And, you know, back then it was a very organic stampede. It was principally ginned up by the guy that did Blindsided. Hazelwood was his name. And yeah, Mark Hazelwood. And so we had something that kind of started off easy and then built up and then came to a hard crescendo. And then when the non-event occurred, which was, we had published an article with the interview with Zachariah Sitchin on Yowza, and we didn't see it happening back then. But after that, I mean, interest completely collapsed. Now, what I'm seeing with Comet Elenin, I mean, it's like, you know, let's fast forward here a few years, and I'm not seeing the same kind of organic stampede that we saw with the 2003 Planet X non-event. It's a very synthetic stampede. It was something where once the object was announced, you don't have this normal process of people chewing on it and finding it and coming up with their ideas and notions. Literally, it was, you know, comb the waterfront for every kind of off-the-wall idea imaginable and get it out there working, pump it up. So, I mean, what we saw was that everything was really synthetically ginned up. We saw that here. I think that is something that got my attention with this comet more than anything else. That now seems to have died off a little bit, thanks that we have, you know, that they've done this spin with it disintegrating. And a lot of folks just left the topic, principally the looky-loos. But here's a big difference between 2003 and now is that we're not seeing everybody bailing out. What we're seeing are the looky-loos, but I'm seeing that there's a core constituency that is not, you know, being convinced that they need to walk away from this topic right now. They're not buying it, and they're really a little bit angry about it. That's what I see with a lot of folks, that they're really just not happy with it. But what we really need to focus on here is initially exactly where we are with this object, because at this point, the latest imagery I'm seeing, it looks to me like it's reconstituting. Ed, you've been following it most closely, so I'm going to throw this initial question at you, what you're seeing for the current status of Elenin.
Well, it looks like, well, it's there. Now, whether it had broken up, and I guess the technology does say it can pull itself back together and reconstitute itself, especially since the pieces would continue on the original orbital path. But the latest pictures we have, there's some even I saw from today, if I unverified, but and it looks like it's there.
It looks like it's there. You know, I read on September 3rd, Leonid Elenin did publish an article on it. And I thought there was a lot of useful information there, actually. You know, what he was saying is, first off, Elenin, and he does it, it's really interesting. He puts up a table and says, well, the comet's really not in a particular spot in the system where it would be inclined to disintegrate, as other comets would, coming a little too close to the sun. And it's just off into a more benign zone. Doesn't go into any depth on that. That was the one thing I noticed. The other thing is that I've watched him in his threads, discussion threads, and the one question that really he's having to grapple with, and you get to understand this even more clearly when you start doing, you take the Russian language posts and run them through Google Translator. And so when he's getting questions in Russian, he's much clearer and in his responses, because obviously it's his native language. Now, what he is saying is that he believes that the comet is disintegrating and that it is going to crumble, but this is a projection. It is an estimate. On the other hand, we have the Minor Planet Center, which on the same day is publishing a new observation notice for Elenin, and added a footnote to the page that I thought was really interesting. I look for those kind of things. Footnotes can really be a great place to bury some interesting tidbits. And in the footnote, it said that there was discordant observations, which is simply saying, hey, people aren't agreeing on what they're seeing. So based on the fact that there's not a universal agreement amongst astronomers as to exactly what they're seeing with the object, then Minor Planet Center said, well, that disagreement, that variance, if you will, substantiated their estimate that the comet was disintegrating. That is interesting as well for what it goes. But with that in mind, let me go to John DiNardo. John, what have you seen? Hey, what have you seen on Elenin, current status on this that's caught your attention?
I have to confess I have not been studying it at all. So I can tell you what I've learned, how comets behave, but regarding Elenin, I think you should speak to the other folks in our assembly here.
Okay. Well, we brought you in, because we want to do Earth changes on this show. And, we'll talk about Elenin in this first half, and then we're going to really get more heavily into the Earth changes, because that is a big priority concern for me. There are things that are going on with shifting weather patterns. I mean, we have firestorms in Texas like they've never seen before. Every time you pick on the news, the weather guy's going, well, this is a 100-year event. Everything is a 100-year event. We're having one 100-year event after another, or we're having something that we've never even seen before. And I think that is something we really need to focus on, because that's going to be the greatest impact for people in terms of their survival preparation and planning. Let me go to Richard. Richard, on the Elenin story, have there been any late developments that have been interesting for you?
Well, yeah, as far as the Torah code aspect of it, a few days ago when we heard that the comet might be breaking up, we weren't sure what to make out of that. And I remembered, in the Bible code book that Michael Drosnin wrote that was published in 1997, he had two tables on page 155. The first one said Comet 5772, which is the Hebrew calendar year for 2012. By the way, the year 2012 in the Hebrew calendar starts this month, which is kind of interesting. It says Earth annihilated, but then he says, but where 2012 is encoded, there is also a statement that disaster will be prevented. So then he had a second table that said Comet, it will be crumbled, I will tear to pieces, 2012. And I remembered having read that rather cryptic table a long time ago and ran over to the bookshelf, yanked the book out, and sure enough, there it was. And we didn't know there would be a comet this year, or that it would be crumbled or be torn to pieces. So then that instigated a process where I contacted the professors and rabbis who are the Torah code experts, that being Rabbi Matityahu Glazerson, as well as Dr. Robert Haralick. Told them what I'd found. I sent them a scan from the book so they could see the table, and so they wouldn't have to go get it out of their library. And in short order, I had new tables on Elenin from Rabbi Glazerson. And the first one he sent me was back on the 23rd of August. Now you have to understand, these tables are generated using computer software, using equidistant letter sequencing out of a 3,321-year-old text, which is pretty unbelievable at times. But his first table had the word Elenin and Nibiru, which is within a few characters of each other. It says under Elenin, the star, And then there were two dates. One said 2013 to 2014, and then it said in 2011 to 2012, meaning that it was going to be a little bit in each of those years, or it could be in the overlap between the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian calendar, is the way we're looking at it. So we thought that was interesting and thought, well, maybe it seems that could mean that Elenin is going to be visible this year and into 2012, and Nibiru perhaps in 2013 and 2014. Now, we don't know exactly what it means. We just don't know. So then after that, I got another table that was a bit more descriptive, and Glegerson was really excited and actually called me from New York to say he had found within one of those tables where it said Elenin and Nibiru in 5771, that's this year, the star. He came up with this date, the 20th of Elul, which is in Hebrew September 19th to the 20th. And he was quick to point out, I don't know what this means. I don't know what the date means. So we're kind of intrigued with that date to see what's going to happen on between the 19th and 20th of September. We just don't know. And then when the comet crumbled, he sent me a new table where he looked that up. And this one was really a big table, and it said, Elenin, to be finished, which is interesting to have all of that in one line. To be finished, will break, broken, the comet star in 5772, and then at the bottom left of the table it says, in the end of days, which is always a rather awesome kind of sentence to have appear in one of these tables. So all I can say is we learn more about these Torah codes all of the time. We don't always know how to interpret them correctly. And sometimes we really think that the Torah codes are mirroring what is out in the press at the time. That it's almost like they're mirroring headlines or what people are talking about or what's on the Internet. I still find them very engrossing and quite amazing.
Well, I see that, but when we have the tables, and first off, I want to say to the listeners out there, if you, on the episode page for this show, you'll see where it says Comet Elenin link page. There's a link there. If you click on that, that will take you to the link page on yowza.com. And from there, you'll see the table, the third table Richard is talking about. Just click on that, and it'll increase to full size, and so you can read it. Now, here's the thing that was interesting, and what I want to do is then get Ed to jump in on this in terms of what people are going to see and when they're going to see it. Because right now, what we have is the last update in terms of what is supposed to be visible was Leonid Elenin on the 3rd, and what he said is that amateur astronomers between now and the 26th will most likely be the ones to observe it, and other astronomers. However, a detailed look is not going to happen until the 26th of September when it comes in range of SOHO. So with that, let me go over to Ed. And Ed, in terms of what we're going to see and when we're going to see it, what is it you're finding so far in your research?
Well, I know Mr. Elenin is actually counting on the SOHO satellite to pick it up around September 23rd.
Right.
Which I don't understand if he said it disintegrated, but anyway, he finished his story with that, and that we can expect around the beginning of October, the comet should appear in the pre-dawn sky. He doesn't say if that means we'll see it with the naked eye or not. He didn't elaborate on that. But we entered the danger zone here a few days ago, as you well know. And with Richard, I might bring up the one thing that really throws, I don't know about Mr. Masters, but it really throws me, is the one on the Torah code where it says the dates in September, right? I mean, boom, that's only about 5 or 6 days from a bad time for us with that comet. It's going to be in a nasty position. If it speeds up more, it could be there around that date.
It's interesting. We don't know what the date means, but we are kind of keeping our eye on things.
Well, you're doing that, but you know what I saw with the three-core Torah code tables, and I mean, first off, let me just explain to my listeners, if you're familiar with Bible code, Michael draws in Torah code, it's the same thing except it's a much more sophisticated, broader study because you have a team of researchers, they're professionals in various disciplines, whether it's cryptography or linguists or rabbis, they're all bringing a lot of expertise to it. And I was really surprised that these three tables could be generated as quickly as they could. The thing that we need to really focus on here is that you have, in three tables that you have provided for us, we have Elenin, we have Nibiru, and we have 5772. That is what really is catching my attention. And if we're having this kind of a situation where these three things are, that to me is, yeah, on one hand, we have to be concerned with coincidence on the appearance of dates on multiple tables. But this, to me, where 5772, Nibiru, and Elenin pop up on three tables at three times transcends coincidence. I think that what we have here is more a case of lending credibility to this third table that Ed is concerned about, the second one, which has saying that something around
Elul.
The 19th or the 20th. Elul. Right. And what you have to understand is this is, let me put a little sequence here for you. All right. You have, on September 11th, and you have Leonid Elenin saying, is somebody sniffing up real hard out there? They're having a hard time breathing? And, but you have coming in, we have the September 11th, Leonid Elenin says it's not going to survive the 11th. So if it survives the 11th, that's a different ball game. And it, from the imagery we're seeing now that's starting to come in, it does look like it could be possibly regenerating a new coma. The last one was blown off by a CME. Now, it survives perihelion, then it's going to its next point, which we raised in the video, which is the 26th, which is when it crosses the ecliptic and is at its closest distance to Earth. Now, in between those two is an area of high interaction with the sun. And 19th to the 20th caught my attention most particularly because this is something that's referenced quite often in the scientific literature on Elenin in comparisons with Comet S4 Linear. And S4 Linear in 2000, just before it crossed the ecliptic, man, it came apart like it hit a wall. It was just really a spectacular sight. So on the 19th to the 20th, we're looking around the same time period, a few days before crossing the ecliptic, which is when Linear popped. So here we have September 11th, perihelion. Leonid Elenin says it's not going to survive that. We have the second Torah code table that talks to the 19th to the 20th for something, which, if we compare it with what happened to Comet S4 Linear in 2000, is a dead-on hit. Then on the 26th, we know it's an important date because think about it. That's when SOHO is aimed to pick it up, to follow this object once it crosses the ecliptic and it's at its closest point to the Earth. So when I'm looking at that one table, and we just have that one date reference to the 19th and the 20th, but I think it's a really, really strong date reference.
Did the term the star stick out to you, Marshall?
Well, that's the question I have. And, the star, and let's bring John in for this because it's appearing in the Torah. John,
yes.
When you see prophetic passages on other objects, other prophecies, and the term star is used, how have you seen the ancients use star? Is it something where, for example, we would see a blue star in the sky during the middle of the day?
Oh, well, I'm trying to recall. specific passages. What comes to mind is similar to what you're asking, and that is in Isaiah chapter 63, verse 6. Now, I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Bible, which I think has a better translation of this particular verse than does the King James. Isaiah 63, verse 6, and this is God speaking through Isaiah. Quote, "In my anger I trod down the peoples, made them drunk with my fury, then poured out their lifeblood on the earth." Well, look at the word poured and lifeblood on the earth. Those words, I looked up in the King James concordance of the King James Bible, that's the Strong's concordance. I looked up the original Hebrew word from which this was translated, and I found out that it's not lifeblood, but it's actually the word netzach in Hebrew, N-E-T-S-A-C-H. And amazingly, it's spelled with a capital N. And this is a name, a proper noun given to this comet, this huge celestial body, which God is talking about in the original Hebrew through Isaiah. And I looked up the word netzach, and now I'm going to give you the exact Hebrew meaning right from the concordance. Netzach, capital N-E-T-S-A-C-H, probably identical with index number 5331, through the idea of brilliancy of color, juice of the grape as blood red, blood. Now it says it's similar to 5331, so let's go to index number 5331, and in the Hebrew it's netzach with a lowercase n, and it says from 5329, properly a goal, G-O-A-L. In other words, the bright object at a distance traveled towards, hence, figuratively, splendor or truthfulness, confidence, but usually, continually, usually means continually, travel towards a goal continually to the most distant point of view. This is amazing. So now that reversed to 5329. I'm going to read 5329, natzach. It's a slight variation on the word netzach, but the words are all tied together in their meaning. A primitive root properly to glitter from afar. In other words, to be eminent as superintendent of the temple service. So here we go. We put it all together. We have a glittering object from afar. It's blood red, like the juice of the grape. It's bright object at a distance, traveling towards, and continually towards its goal. Now, if you take that all back to the original verse, Isaiah 63:6, we could say, then brought this bright glittering object from afar to its goal, planet Earth. So this is what I have been inspired by God somehow, I believe, because I don't know how I would have gotten the idea of going specifically to that verse 6 of chapter 63. It must have been some kind of inspiration from God, I believe, because I don't have the capability myself to zero in on something like that. But you can see from all these definitions, it's so distinctly and clear that we're talking about a large blood red glittering object traveling from afar, from the greatest distance away toward its goal, continually toward its goal, which is Earth. And that's the Hebrew translation, which the original, of course, the English translators who translated into the Complete Jewish Bible, which is in English, or into the King James Bible, they could not comprehend such a bizarre meaning. So therefore, they reached out for the most extreme and obscure meanings. But you can see it right here. The concordance lays it out. So there's the star that you're talking about. And I'm sure in other verses that does speak of a star. For example, we have the Israelites leaving in their exodus from Egypt. They were guided by a pillar of fire during the nighttime, which gave them light. And then during the daytime, this was a cloud over them that protected them from the sun. So they were protected by two sort of umbrellas, one an umbrella of light at night and the umbrella of a cloud during the daytime. And I speculated from basic physics, if you have a comet coming very close to Earth, there will be an electrical discharge. It's called sort of like a tube or a plasma discharging from the comet to Earth, because the proximity is so close between a comet and Earth that the electrostatic forces between that electrified comet and Earth, which is neutral in electrical potential, the forces are now become so great that they overcome the resistance of the air between them, and you have a discharging similar to what you would have with a lightning bolt. However, this is a controlled discharge. A lightning bolt would be catastrophic. It would be destructive. In fact, there have been cases where God brought a comet very close to Earth in the book of, well, in the case of King David, and brought it so close that the discharge was uncontrolled. It was excessive, and it annihilated 70,000 people of Israel, of the tribes of Israel, because they had, according to the Bible in 2 Samuel 24, they had sinned against God terribly, and he was punishing them. I know that people don't like to hear this about God, but David looked up, and in the scriptures it tells you that David looked up and he saw the sword of the angel of God pointing right down toward earth, and he begged God to cease this slaughter of the people, and then God repented and withdrew the sword. Now, this was a comet discharging to earth with a column of plasma. God can ordain that the comet will get just close enough to either create a devastating, destructive discharge, or far enough away that there will be a controlled discharge. Sort of like in electronics, you have what is called a component that's called a resistor. The resistor has a certain amount of resistance that limits the amount of current, electrical current, so that you do not have a destructive amount of current flowing, and that's how they control current flow, is with a resistor. Well, similarly, the distance between the comet and Earth and that resistive layer of atmosphere above the Earth to the comet presents a resistive property such that very conceivably the people of Israel could have been protected by this column of plasma discharging during the nighttime. Now, the Star of Bethlehem in the New Testament, this had to be a very similar event to the one in the book of Exodus where we just spoke about the discharging of the pillar of what the Bible calls the pillar of fire, because the shepherds in the book of Luke saw the comet. They saw the discharge. The kings of the east actually followed it, and there's no way you can follow a comet if it's above the earth because you just don't know where it is. But when it begins to discharge, then that pinpoints a particular location.
Wow. So, I mean, you're really giving us a very good insight into how comets are described in the Bible and, how this applies here. Now, John, I am just dying of curiosity to hear both Richard and Ed weigh in on this. As, first off, Richard, as you've been listening to this, what's been rattling around in your gourd?
Well, a lot of things. As you know, Marshall, Lynn Marzulli and I went to visit and interview Stan Deo, who's something of a scientist. He's on Coast to Coast AM quite often. And Stan had also looked at some other ancient texts, and like the rest of us, are finding them very intriguing with the things that are happening to the Earth in the past couple of years. He came up with something which I thought was really interesting called the Shatnez Getz. And essentially those are the little crowns that are over some of the Hebrew characters. But oddly enough, the computer doesn't know how to interpret those. And we're thinking that there might be a whole other set of information in those. And he gave us an example of an ancient text that he had seen where it was embossed on copper plates. It reminded me a lot of how they say the cauldron was saved.
It was on bronze
plate. And except he said in this particular case, it was embossed at different depths, which is really sophisticated. So he said if you took the plate and you did an imprint of it, then just the really deeply embossed characters would show up on your paper. And in those just deeply embossed characters was a whole other set of information that was encoded. So I need to talk to Professor Haralick about that.
So you're thinking that your tables could be incomplete, or you're missing other tables that you could be using?
Well, when he mentioned that, I thought, well, that's true. The computer doesn't have, when you look at the characters of the Hebrew text, the version that they use is called the Quran, not the Koran, which is the Islamic book, but there's an actual transcription of the Hebrew Torah that they use, and it's all encoded using the computer Hebrew font, but doesn't use the Shatnez-Getz characters.
Right.
So that's something that I have to talk to Professor Herlick about and see what he thinks. He believes there's another level, another dimension of Torah codes that we have not tapped yet. And I know that Professor Rips has been working really hard on some really amazing things, parallelisms, total sentences that he's finding. It's just really amazing. We wouldn't even be making any comparisons to all these ancient texts if it wasn't for the Judeo-Christian writings in the Bible of all of these things that until recently haven't made a whole lot of sense.
Right.
And when you look at them in more of a scientific viewpoint, you go, well, okay. For example, here, I'm trying to find a passage here. Revelation chapter 6 says, there was a great earthquake, the sun turned black, the stars in the sky fell to earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Now, when you read that, as a kid when I read that, I thought, wow, cool, that's really something. How would that ever happen? And you think it's more or less rather metaphorical. But knowing what we know today about pole shifts and all of that, and the Earth possibly expanding in another mode of expansion, the continents could come loose and slide around if we had a pole shift, and there you go.
Right.
Well, yeah. Well, every continent and island were shaken. They may not necessarily have moved, but they felt the vibration, or they will feel. This is a future prophecy.
Right.
But I agree with what you're saying. I mean, this will be a huge earthquake, and you can see the physical characteristics that are portrayed in the text, such as what did it say? The stars rolling up in the sky like a scroll. In other words, all of a sudden the stars disappeared. And well, first before that, you see what looks like stars plunging to the earth,
falling to the earth.
Right, as you would a fig tree shaken by a mighty wind, right? And this would clearly, well, it strongly suggests that these are meteors becoming meteorites. When it strikes Earth. They're meteorites, and they glow because of the heat of the friction with the air, with the atmosphere as they're plunging, accelerating to Earth. They get hotter and hotter from the friction until they actually begin to glow, and at some point, many of them will actually explode from the heat. It's like taking a chestnut and holding it over a fire. Eventually it will explode, or a piece of popcorn. Well, those are the stars that we see falling from the sky. Not really stars, but flaming, glowing, heated up meteors that strike the Earth and become meteorites. But now the scroll rolling up indicates that all of a sudden it appears that the actual stars in the sky disappeared, and that could be massive clouds of black ash. So, it really does give you an understanding of the scientific phenomena that will occur.
If you go back to like an Isaiah passage here in chapter 24, it says, behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and maketh it waste and turneth it upside down and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. Now, when you read that, you go, okay, he's turning it upside down. Well, what does that mean? I mean, there's another reference to possible pole shift, that something big could happen.
Well, that's, guys, I mean, the whole pole shift concept just keeps coming up again and again and again. But before we get further on this is really interesting stuff. But I'd really like, Ed, for you to jump in on this and just weigh in on what you've heard so far. Go for it.
Well, one thing is right off the bat, because you guys are discussing it, I'll get on it right away. I think about, in the case of a pole shift with the continents and the tectonic plates moving so rapidly, that would make, to me, an optical illusion that the stars disappeared if this happened at night, because I would be moving so fast. I really wouldn't. Well, I mean, there's been predictions that we could move as fast as 1,000 miles an hour. That would give the optical illusion that the stars disappeared, as far as I can see. and I just wanted to throw that in there. But the main thing about that, you guys really make it interesting, is it makes me sort of freaky, is because I look at all the Bible code and the Torah code here, and they have the word Elenin, Nibiru, and they have dates. But the one thing that stuck out to me, and it didn't really fit in, was the star. And you guys covered that. I only wanted to throw in one other thing, is the Hopis consider the Kachina a star, don't they, Mr. Masters?
Yeah. You know, I mean, when the thing here is that everything we've been talking about so far in terms of biblical prophecy, and frankly, a lot of the science. I mean, again, everything seems to come back to the blue star Kachina prophecy, what it predicts. You know, the thing is that the blue Kachina will unmask, all right? And what the Hopis say is that after he unmasks, the ceremonies stop. They stop dancing, which really suggests that there's an impact event or something happens as a result of it. Keep in mind, you know, as you pointed out, Ed, in the dust trail, we're going to pass through that, the residual of it between November 3rd and 7th. And in November, the International Space Station is at this point going to be unmanned. And I love that. I mean, good Lord, you don't want those folks up there in the middle of that kind of a maelstrom. But
the most recent pictures of Elenin also are a blue shade.
Right.
I just was told today.
Yeah, no, I mean, the latest imagery on it, I just saw this stuff that just came in today, and it looks like the coma is starting to reconstitute. And it does look a little elongated. You know, I think that John had something on that. I think when, let me bring John back in.
Yes. Well,
and yeah, let's talk about that, the elongation, and whether that is actually disintegration or something else.
Well, typically, the disintegration, it seems to me that you're correct. You folks are correct in stating that it's reforming the coma, and you can imagine why. There's a lot of plasma in our solar system that has been blown out in waves by these numerous coronal mass ejections from the sun. So as this comet, even though it got discharged, it discharged some of its plasma passing close to another one of our solar system members, perhaps. Then that's why it lost its tail or coma, but then it's beginning to reconstitute because it's picking up more plasma again as it travels through. It's like like a snowball being rolled across a snowy front yard. It gets bigger and bigger. But typically, what happens with this is all basic physics from the field of electricity and magnetism, and that is when a comet comes in from deep space into our solar system, it busts through the wall of our house, of our solar system house, which is called it's called a heliosphere. It's a huge sphere that surrounds the entire solar system, and this sphere is, you can visualize it as a red glowing sphere, sort of mystical and attractive in its appearance, and it's comprised of plasma, which is electrically positive charges. And when this comet busts through the wall of our solar system house and comes into our solar system house, it picks up all this plasma. It sticks to the comet, sort of like a bee flying through the bubble, through a bubblegum bubble. The bee becomes engulfed in bubblegum and actually pulls a whole long trail of bubblegum behind it as it flies in toward the center of the bubble. Similarly, there's a tail of not physically sticky, but electrically sticky plasma. You know how sticky plasma can be when you go to open up a box of that's been shipped to your house, and it's filled with all these white styrofoam peanuts, and you dip your hand in to get the package, and all these peanuts stick to your skin and to your shirt, and you can shake your hands and you can't get them off of there. And if you grab it with one hand, it sticks to the other hand. So that's the electrical stickiness that we're talking about, this plasma that sticks to of course, it's the peanuts would be negative electrons, negatively charged electrons, whereas with plasma, that's positively charged protons, but the principle is the same. So you have this bee flying through the bubblegum bubble, and as it gets closer to the center, that tail begins to stretch more and more, and eventually the tail breaks loose from the outer heliosphere, and the bubblegum, or I'm combining two analogies. One is reality and the other is the analogy. But the bubblegum strand breaks loose and it snaps in an undulating whip-like fashion and contracts toward the bee. Similarly, that plasma is beginning to accelerate as the plasma is being pulled by the comet closer to the sun. Why is the plasma accelerating? Because you have positively charged protons which are getting close to the sun, and the sun has a predominant negative charge, electrons, a space charge of electrons surrounding the sun. Because whenever it blows out a CME, the protons are like the boys in an army. You know, they're sent out into foreign shores to fight foreign wars while the girls are left at home. Similarly, the electrons are like the girls that are left at home around the sun. They don't really travel that far out because they have very little mass, whereas the protons have about 2,000 times the mass of an electron, and they travel far out. So that now you're left with a residual or female type of negatively charged sun. So as the plasma comes closer, it's like the boys coming home from the army. The closer they get to home and see all those girls, the more they begin to accelerate. And that's why the tail comes rapidly, catches up with the comet itself, and then it engulfs the comet in a huge glowing ball. It lights up. It's like a man walking into a dark room puffing on a cigar.
Okay. So, yeah, we have a question in the chat room Susan sent us, and for those of you listening in the virtual chat room, if you make sure that our moderator there, Susan, is on top of your question, we will get it covered during the show. And for those of you who want to call in, Bill Zam is standing by in the screening room. Make sure you give him your name and where you're at and what your question is. And the guest call-in number is 818-495-6962, 818-495-6962. And I just want to make sure we did cover this one question from Dr. Kate in the chat room. She wants to know, picking up plasma, how is plasma generated?
The plasma originates from the sun. When the sun blows out solar winds very frequently, almost constantly, and sometimes the solar winds are very strong in the form of coronal mass ejections, whereby the coronal layer of the sun actually lifts off and is blown out into space in all directions in three-dimensional space. Well, that's where the plasma originates, because you have a splitting of and I can't give you the complete details because I'm not a nuclear physicist, but there is nuclear fusion occurring, and some of the byproducts of the solar activity are protons, which are only merely hydrogen atoms. Now, hydrogen atom, like any other atom, if it's neutral, has the same number of protons in its nucleus as it has electrons in its valence band surrounding the nucleus. So therefore, the positive and negative charges, if they're both equal in number, cancel each other out. And you have a neutral hydrogen ion. But when their reaction occurs such that that single revolving electron in a valence band around the hydrogen nucleus, that single electron is kicked out by a high energy, now that you have an ion, you have a hydrogen ion, and now it has a net charge, which it did not have when it was clinging to its electron. It's like a man who was married and now he's divorced. He's single. He's a bachelor again. And that's how you get protons. They're blown out. Now, a proton is about 1,841 times more massive than an electron. So you can see when the sun blows out both electrons and protons into deep space, it's like a baseball player. He has two kind of balls that he can hit. One is a wiffle ball and the other is a hard ball. Which one's going to go farther? The hard ball. That's like analogous to the proton. And that's why the protons travel so far out, because they're blown out by the force of the sun, and then they all collect in a huge sphere, many, many astronomical units out even beyond Pluto. And that's how the proton sphere, called the heliosphere, is formed. But then it gets discharged by incoming bodies. And these incoming bodies, do just like the comet I was telling you about. They create a low resistance path, sort of like a bug flying into one of these electrified bug zappers that we used to have years ago. And they get in between the electrified high voltage plates. And what does the bug do? How does it zap? How does the zapping occur? Well, there's no zapping when there's nothing but air in between these high voltage electrified plates. They want to discharge, but the air provides such a resistance that there's no electrical discharging current. However, when the bug flies in there, he presents a low resistance discharge path and causes a short circuit right through him from the positively charged high voltage plate to the negatively charged high voltage plate. As you know, opposite charges attract, and that's what happens with comets. It's like the bee coming through there. All of a sudden, you get this discharging of the heliosphere. Now, the heliosphere got severely discharged over the past decade by Planet X and all of its comets coming through into our solar system. But now it's becoming pumped up again. And, well, that basically answers your question without me digressing too far.
Okay. Now, Richard, we've had a really good discussion about the word star, which appears in the tables that you gave us. Now, based on what you've heard so far about all of that, what do you assign a meaning to, or what do you think the Torah code researchers are assigning a meaning to the term star as it is used in the three tables that you provided us and which we have made available on YOWUSA.com?
I think the word, the phrase "the star" came originally from Rabbi Glazerson, and he came up with a table a couple years ago that I had posted on my website, and I believe you posted it too, Marshall, that said the star Nibiru. And I think he was using that phrase along with to see if there was anything in the Torah about Nibiru. What I think is interesting about all these new tables is that's a very unusual name, and to find it so many times in the Torah, I think, is significant.
Well,
I think the word "the star" might be connected to Nibiru.
Well, you know, one thing is Nibiru is a Sumerian word. It's not a Hebraic word. It means planet of the crossing, as we all know.
Right.
Sure. However, now
we know that
for that to be in a Hebrew code,
I was just going to say he's looking at how that word would be presented in modern Hebrew, and then he takes that and looks at it sometimes from a Kabbalistic approach, and other times just from knowing ancient Hebrew, and puts that word in and does a search on it, and he has continuously found it, which, you know, not every word is in, we can't find everything in the Torah, but sometimes we end up with multiple keyword sets, and that's always interesting when that happens.
Ask him, when you speak to him, ask him to look for the word Netzach, N-E-T-S-A-C-H. And that is the word that the Bible, in the original Hebrew, for the destroyer. If I may, I'd like to read from the Complete Jewish Bible, the book of Exodus, and I'm going to read just a brief passage, a very salient passage here. Then Moses called for all the leaders of Israel and said, "Select and take lambs for your families and slaughter the Pesach," that means Passover. Slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, which is never mind, I won't get into detail. Take a bunch of hyssop leaves and dip it in the blood of this Passover lamb, which is in the basin. Dip it in the blood in the basin. Now, visualize this. You're painting blood. Smear it on the two sides and on the top of the door frame. Now, visualize this. You've got two strokes, one going on the left door frame, a stroke of blood painted in a horizontal line on the left side of the door frame. And similarly, you have a stroke of blood painted horizontally on the right side of the door frame, and then finally you have another stroke of blood painted on the top of the door frame. I'll continue reading the passage in the Complete Jewish Bible from Exodus chapter 12. Then none of you is to go out the door of his house until morning, for Adonai, that's the Lord, will pass through to kill the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood on the top and on the two sides, Adonai will pass over the door and will not allow the slaughterer, King James renders that as, will not allow the destroyer, which is Netzach, to enter your houses and kill you. You are to observe this as a law, you and your descendants forever. So this slaughterer was to come over, and it's what is the connection between this two strokes? What kind of a picture is formed by a stroke of blood with two strokes of blood on each side of it, but below it? Well, go to Zechariah Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet, page 240, and I'll read you a passage from there. Wherever archaeologists uncovered the remains of Near Eastern peoples, the symbol of the winged globe was conspicuous, dominating temples and palaces, carved on rocks, etched on cylinder seals, painted on walls. It accompanied kings and priests, stood above their thrones, hovered above them in battle scenes, was etched into their chariots. Clay, metal, stone, and wood objects were adorned with this symbol. The rulers of Sumer and Akkad, Babylon and Assyria, etc., all revered this symbol. Hittite kings, Egyptian pharaohs, Persian shahs, all proclaimed the symbol and what it stood for, supreme. It remains so for millennia. So this is, and it goes on to say that it's actually the sign of the cross. It's Tau, or Tav in the Hebrew, and it was seen as a cross in the sky. Well, before it became a cross, it was actually a winged globe, meaning the bottom, the vertical bar of that cross was missing. Why was it missing? Because the comet did not come close enough in Egypt during the time of the Passover. It did not come close enough to Earth to actually discharge that column of plasma that I was talking about, that pillar of fire that we just talked about before.
Right.
So if it gets close enough, this plasma comet starts to spread out. Wings begin to spread out laterally in both directions, wings of plasma as it gets closer, because the solar winds are now blowing very heavily. Why? Because you have a flirtation between the comet coming closer and closer to the sun and the sun itself. You have an electrical flirtation. They're both getting hotter. They're both gasping and breathing more heavily, and the sun is throwing out more plasma. And this plasma builds up and collects around the comet in the form of wings. And there's your winged globe. So now we've connected the Bible account to the actual physical phenomena of how a comet can become a winged globe. And Zecharia Sitchin, on page 241 of his classic landmark book, The 12th Planet, shows various pictures, each one from various civilizations who all saw the same winged globe. And it's interesting. They all appear with different, drawn in a different style, but they're all the same winged globe. It's sort of like, I can describe the pictures that I'm seeing right here in the book to you. It's sort of as if you were to see a big eagle flying head-on toward you. You'd see the body and the head of the eagle, but the two wings flapping on the side. Well, that's what the pictures depict. And you know the U.S. Air Force insignia is that winged globe. The Chrysler Corporation insignia is that winged globe. You see, it's been carried on for centuries. It's an ancient legend that has been carried on, and it's just amazing. But now, when this planet comes again, you're going to see a winged globe. If it gets close enough to Earth, it will discharge, and you'll see the sign of the cross, just as we see in Zecharia Sitchin's book. And that's the Thunderbird. You know the Thunderbird that the Indians talk about?
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do this, because we're at the top of the hour here. Actually, went a little bit over. And let's pick this up on the backside, give folks a couple of minutes to put the cat out, put on the tea. And when we get back, let's work on this, and then let's start taking a look forward to projecting out what everyone could possibly see and experience between now and beginning of January 2012. So hang with me, fellows, and for my listeners out there, a little something different, kind of appropriate to our conversation tonight. This is something from 1952, Francis Langford singing When You Wish Upon a Star. And here we are. Bill, are you there?
I am now live on the air. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. We have lost our
I can hear you.
We have our guest back. That's good. And John, are you back there with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's good. We have been having some real bizarre problems with the switchboard tonight. Darn. I guess we're just getting popular with the cockroaches again. That's just the way it happens. But anyway, John, before we went to the music break, you were in the middle of something, so why don't you get back on that?
Well, I was talking about the comets and how they operate, and actually how we have ancient testimony from both the Hebrews in the book of Exodus, which corresponds to the testimony of other civilizations who lived during that same time period and witnessed these same cataclysms. Of course, the Colburn Bible, which you have worked extensively with, Marshall, really shows the striking parallels between the Bible account in the book of Exodus and the Egyptian survivors' account of this very same period of disaster, which was around 1650 BC. And even the archaeologists point to the same time period, because in geology, the field of geology has studied ancient volcanic eruptions, and there was an enormous explosion of the Santorini volcano, which is located in the Aegean Sea, north of Egypt. They dated this explosion of the volcanic caldera, the Santorini caldera, at around 1650 BC. And many Bible scholars date the period of the Exodus as around the same time period, 1650 BC. It's very interesting how the field of science confirms the biblical prophecy and also the historical accounts of other civilizations as recorded in the Colburn Bible. But if you go to Exodus chapter 9 of the Bible, God is telling Moses and Aaron to scoop up handfuls of black ashes from the furnace and throw them up in the air in the face of Pharaoh and his magicians. This is Exodus chapter 9. And God says, when you cast that ash up in the air, I will cause hot burning ashes to cover the entire land of Egypt. And so Moses and Aaron obeyed and threw the ashes up in the air, and the entire land was covered with hot burning ashes, and it was burning the faces of Pharaoh and his magicians. Now, comparing that, correlating that account in Exodus chapter 9 to what the geologists say was the explosion of the Santorini volcano, that cloud of ash would have drifted southward just at that particular God-ordained moment when, the explosion occurred prior to the event between Moses, Aaron, and the Pharaoh, and gave just enough time for that ash cloud to drift southward. So that's another very interesting parallel between science and the Bible. Another one is this.
You know what they say in comedy, timing is everything. And so, it would have to apply the same here. With this, we have, interestingly enough, I mean, you're getting into some excellent descriptions about the red star Kachina, which is going to follow in the wake of the blue star Kachina. And before we go further on this point, what I wanted to do is add, in terms of the blue star Kachina, red star Kachina, and we're looking at those two objects, one following after another. And here's an interesting question. I'm going to throw it to all three of you guys. We have a blue Kachina, red Kachina, two very different objects. One is a harbinger, one is the principal event. And this is predicted by Hopi prophecy. We know that it has taken approximately 10,000 years for Comet Elenin to arrive from the hinterlands, so to speak, of our solar system, and which means it would not have been present during the last flyby of Planet X, which was in the 10 plagues of Exodus. All right, so now the question in my mind is there a connection here in terms of Hopi prophecy to knowledge that predates the ancient Egyptians and the Hebrews? Anybody want to step up on that one?
Well,
I might toss in that the Hopis, their prophecy didn't mention the Kachinas about the other, what you would call suns, worlds, or whatever, as pertaining to, like, we're going to go into the fifth world.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, they didn't pertain to that before. You know, the Kachina pertains to this one.
Well, it suggests to me that the Kachina has never come in before, and this is its first entry into our solar system.
Right.
Now, Marshall, you and I had spoken privately about this, and you also suggested this to me, that it's a prophecy of future events without any prior knowledge, not based upon any prior knowledge, such as a previous passage of this blue Kachina. It may never have occurred, but yet somehow supernaturally prophecy foretold the coming of this blue Kachina. And you know, prophecy is such an amazing phenomenon here with Edgar Cayce. It just boggles the mind to think about it. We really should get into that too. But that's what I wanted to. That was my personal belief, is that it's supernatural prophecy of something that's never occurred before.
Okay.
I think it's interesting as far as the book Worlds in Collision, Immanuel Velikovsky's book, where he refers to the plagues of Exodus. He refers to an ancient Indian transcript that says that the oceans stood up, and believed that at that point it wasn't just happening in Egypt, but it was a global phenomenon going on.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you can imagine what happens to the oceans just by that little old moon that's out there. 1/5 the mass of planet Earth. It causes tidal fluctuations. Of course, distance is the predominant factor. Distance more so than mass between two gravitationally attracting bodies. But when this planet gets very close, I mean, it's so huge, it can definitely cause the oceans to move. And you know, I wanted to say about the pole shift that occurred, or the parting of the Red Sea that occurred in around 1650 BC, when the Egyptian army was chasing after the fleeing Israelite slaves. And God presented a column, a discharging column, or a cloud. I guess it was a cloud of fog between the advancing Egyptian army and the helpless Israelite slaves when they reached the shores of the Red Sea. And God told Moses to raise his hand up and the sea would part. Now, people have said, oh, maybe a landmass came up, a land bridge came up. But if you read the accounts in the Bible, it says, no, there was a huge wall of water on both sides of the Israelites as they walked down into the bottom of the seabed, and huge walls of water. Now, imagine what would happen if you had a double tsunami, something where, for example, let's take it on a small scale. You have a bathtub filled with water, and you have a 2x4 that's short enough to fit in sideways, crosswise, to the length of the bathtub, and you put this 2x4 in the bottom of the bathtub, and then you pull the 2x4 abruptly out of the bathtub. What you create is a force on both directions in the bathtub, forcing the water to roll back in both directions. And, you know, just like a tsunami, this is essentially like a tsunami event where you have double drawback. And, you know, with the Asian tsunami, there was tremendous drawback such that the seabed was bare, and there were dead fish or floundering fish flopping all over this sandy seabed, and the children were running out collecting these fish. Well, that seabed, that drawback lasted for about a half hour or so. And then all of a sudden the big tsunami wave came in. Well, this double drawback caused by a ridge crossing the Red Sea, and I believe they found that this ridge actually existed. This ridge might have popped up, and why would it pop up? Well, you have massive gravitationally attracting bodies pulling at the crust of Earth, pulling this fault line up from the seabed of the Red Sea, causing a ridge to form, and then when the body went by, the ridge collapsed again. And that's the same kind of effect that I was describing with the bathtub. And you have a double drawback causing both sides of the sea to part temporarily for a few hours, giving the Israelites enough time to cross. And then when the Egyptians pursued afterward, the water came back, joined together again, and drowned the entire Egyptian army and all their chariots. And we have seen photographs. I have books with photographs of these coral-encrusted chariot wheels and axles at the bottom of the Red Sea.
I've seen those photos, and also, interestingly enough, in the Colburn Bible, you know, there was a lot of folks saying that it was the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea. And, you know, no, I haven't seen the Reed Sea thing really well explained. But one thing that Colburn was very precise about was that the Pharaoh of the Exodus story died at the Red Sea. He was at the head of the column leading the charge. And when the waters rushed in, that was the end of him, and his replacement was a much quieter fellow, more academic, studious, and that it told us that the ancient Egyptians had a real dickens of a time after all this because they were invaded from the south. And because this was, the 10 Plagues of Exodus was a much, much bigger global catastrophe. And it, really transcended that more, hit between the two of them. But, a question I have here gets back to, and the reason why I made that first question, got you guys to answer it, was that when I look at blue Kachina, red Kachina, there's nothing in the Bible that talks about that in terms of that pairing of objects. But
well, we haven't found it yet.
But we have. Richard has three
we
tables
haven't found
of
it in the
Torah
Bible
code.
yet. Right.
Right.
Okay, you're right.
So, in other words, it's embedded in Torah code, so it's very deeply embedded. So now the question, though, that comes to my mind is that, this comet took 10,000 years to get here. All right. So now, John, you're saying it's paranormal prophecy. All right. I still am curious about this. I want to go to it because we have a question that came in from the chat room that also really addresses this. It came in from Mark Cash, and he wants to know, what about the cycle of enlightenment? And so as a preface to answering that question, I want to first go to Richard and say, all right, Richard, here's the point. It took 10,000 years for Comet Elenin to get here. It's mentioned in the Torah code. It's mentioned in Hopi prophecy. So how is this awareness created of an object that was, 10,000 years ago, guys, we were in caves, right? Running around beating women with
I'm not
clubs.
so sure about that anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they're finding a lot of evidence that, and it says, and actually there's a lot of, in the Colburn Bible, interestingly it says, this is not the first time human beings have populated the earth. This is our second time. That the first time, we really messed up. And so we were all told, that was it. Everybody was hosed. And it was start over again. And, how we got there is kind of questionable. But, again, Richard, how do you explain a comet taking 10,000 years to arrive here? So when it left the Oort cloud, we're hanging, we're in caves eating burned meat, right? Now it's here, and our prophecy is talking about it, the Hopi prophecy, the Torah code prophecy. How?
I think it's interesting. Well, the first thing that intrigued me was that a Torah code from a 1997 book would nail it so precisely. And then we go back and we really delve into it, and we end up with 3 more tables about it. I was surprised all that came up. I don't know what to make out of it. I think it's all part of the times in which we're living. I know when we produced Watchers 2, we're currently in production on Watchers 3 right now. But we interviewed a guy, Chuck Misler, who's he's got a doctorate. He has a degree. He's a very bright guy. He was in high security areas of the U.S. He knows a lot about UFOs. He's somewhat of a scientist himself. He just recently moved to New Zealand. But he had some very interesting things to say about all of these, including a couple points that he made that didn't get into the video, and I may save them for a director's cut in the coming months. But one of the things that he said was, we're living in a digital simulation, that there's another reality, and we're seeing it almost like we're living in the Matrix. I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing he said was, it seems like almost the majority of the biblical prophecies that we've been finding, and all of us on this program this evening have been delving into that to try to research everything we can find, and we're still finding things, seems to be that the majority of all of these prophecies are talking about the time we live in now. And it's not just the comet, it's the sun, it's the moon, it's all of these things combined, and there's comments about all of them. And then you're talking about enlightenment. I think what is really interesting, if we go back to the Indian perspective, there's a
Native American.
A very,
it says that, it's interesting. The Mayans say, we're going to the next world. So there's this. The Hopi are saying we're going to the next world.
The
the I Ching says it. The Jewish calendar, all right, is saying the same thing. That
these are civilizations scattered throughout the world without any connection to one another. They're all issuing the same prophecies.
Yeah.
That's right. And what I thought was interesting, I worked on a film back in '07. It was a Leonardo DiCaprio project called The 11th Hour. You guys may have heard of it. And my job was to do all of the special features for the DVD that was pressed on that film. And one of the speakers was an American Indian, Oren Lyons, who's currently out of New York. And we're trying to get in touch with him for Watchers 3, and we have some other contacts as well that we're looking into that are very interesting. And I was really impressed with him almost more than anyone else on the special features because of what he said about 2012 and enlightenment. And he said, and I played you that clip a couple years ago in my studio, Marshall, and you probably remember what he said. He said that, well, enlightenment. He said it would be like you're going swimming, and behind you, you see this very large dorsal fin coming towards you. He said that would be a time of enlightenment.
Oh yeah. And I just, it's interesting when you're saying that. Susan just chatted in something from Mark Cash, and I thought this is useful, so I want to read it for everyone. Is that there is a theory that every roughly several thousand years, humanity has gone through these cycles of enlightenment, where everyone at the top of the cycle is knowing good. For example, God then, as the few thousand years pass by, humanity leaves enlightenment. So we get smart, then we get dumb. Then we get smart again, then we get dumb again. I mean, guys, is this something 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, or is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or is it 1 step forward, 2 step back? What do you think? Let me start off here with Ed.
Personally, I'm in the age of stupid, but I'm waiting for the smart part to come. But I think we've seen. Let's just say I'm very familiar with a lot of Eastern philosophy. We can just say the Eastern mind thinks in a circle, whereas the Western mind thinks in a straight line. Thus, they believe in reincarnation. Everything is a circle. It comes back around, which is a cycle. It obviously cycles. Why wouldn't that conform to it? It appears that way. If you look at everything that's around the world being found by the archaeologists, it is, to me, showing many cycles of people being pretty sharp before. And, if we think we're special, I would beg to differ. There's been some flying machines and every other, what do you call them, submarines and things like that before. We're not the first to come up with this. And I don't know the cycles of all that, but I do know it must be cyclical because it's in several different carbon dating type situations.
That's right.
So perhaps, and the Hopi believe we're going to go into this fifth world or fifth life, and basically that's when we have it made. Maybe we reach the end of the cycle.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a possibility. It's what I'm really kind of focusing on here is, in the last half hour of the show too, is if all of this is coming together, because what we're really waiting for is to see exactly what Elenin is or is not going to do in the next few weeks. And let's just put it out there that, folks, if anyone's talking in absolutes, they're smoking the good stuff, because this story has got more curves than a donkey trail, has had from the very beginning, but it is an Earth-crossing object, and that is a concern. And so now I want to get to the whole point of this interview title, which, explode or does it crumble? And with that, Ed, I want you to address that, and then once you finish that issue, John, I want you to jump back in and talk about the consequences of what Ed is seeing. So, Ed, What's your take on it? Do you see an explosion, or do you see a crumble for the comet? If it is an explosion, what could possibly cause that?
I'm right in line with John, and, well, we had a program on it just in the recent past about the capacitive comet theory. And it's exactly along the line of what John was saying, with the comet being of one fantastic charge, the sun being of another, and the Earth being of another. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen soon, and depending on the, how would you say, the enormosity of an electrical connection between the sun and the comet, that would determine whether it disintegrates or it just breaks up into chunks. It's only going to get about twice as close to the Earth as it will the sun. In other words, it'll be twice as far away from the sun when it's its closest. So perhaps that won't be the violent electrical connection. That connection will be when it gets near Earth. Electrically speaking, I believe it could happen either way, depending on how large of an electrical interaction.
Okay. Let's assume it explodes. All right? And we cannot say that it will or will not. Folks, let's be honest. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen out there. All right? And when that does happen, it may or may not have consequences for us. And we're not going to know anything definitive until we really know. And it's just been the nature of this story. But now let's assume that we have an explosive event and the comet shatters and sends out a pretty wide debris trail. Now, John, I'm going to throw this to you and say, fine, now we've got this shotgun pattern coming. What I've been reporting is it's like flying through flak in World War II. But what are you seeing in terms of us crossing the residual dust tail of this object with a lot of nasty stuff in it?
I believe it's going to sweep Earth, as has happened according to ancient records in the past. The iron oxide dust trail, along with the larger debris, which is gravitationally captured by this huge comet. And the huge comet could be one of the surrounding comets of Planet X and Nibiru, such as Elenin. Elenin may be one of the surrounding comets around Planet X, Nibiru. You know, in the Oort cloud, there is the Oort cloud is way, way out in deep space, beyond the heliosphere. And this Oort cloud is comprised of comets. You know, it's like a huge swarm of gnats way out there. And as this huge celestial body comes in, it attracts some of the comets, sort of like a huge magnet would attract iron filings as you slide the magnet across a table filled with iron filings. You would actually pull some of the iron filings away toward it. And this has been observed by John Murray, Dr. John Murray of the Open College of London back in the 1990s, and similarly, a parallel discovery by Dr. John Matisse of University of Louisiana in the 1990s. They found that long-period comets were no longer randomly moving, but they were moving in such an organized way as to suggest a huge celestial body. In fact, Dr. Matisse and Dr. Murray both postulated the size of this object as being larger than Jupiter. So we know it's going to pull in. It's pulling in either Elenin, the smaller body, or Planet X itself are going to be pulling in debris because they have a huge gravitational field. It's going to sweep past Earth. Where is it going? Why would it go past Earth? Because it's on its way to the sun. The sun is the focus of this elliptical course on which these objects are on. And it's all due to gravity. That's the force that's pulling these objects in. And it's so, gravity is something that everyone in the world understands with painful, a reality. When you hold a rock outstretched in your arm, and release that rock, you know it has to fall to the Earth because body A is being attracted to the much larger body B, planet Earth. Similarly, you have the sun. It's pulling these objects in, and that's what's happening. So it's on its way to the sun, and on its way it's going to pass over the Earth. If it's in an elliptical path, it doesn't go straight, sort of like a one of those paddle balls. Do you ever see, the rubber ball that's connected to a paddle by a long elastic band? And then when you hit the ball flies outward and until it reaches the elastic limit of the band, and then the ball is pulled back in again. Well, it's more, the traveling of these comets is more like an elliptical path. So in order to approach the sun in an elliptical curved path and whip around the sun like a slingshot, it must pass either over or under all the planets on the ecliptic plane, which is that invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. So it's going to pass over Earth, and when it does, it'll sweep Earth. We have a record of that in the book of Exodus, and in the Colburn, too, as you know, Marshall, where rocks...
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Marshall, can I make a quick comment?
You jump in.
There's two things I'd just like to point out. There's been a comet, not a comet, but a meteorite, which has already swept through Peru just a few days ago on the 26th of August. It made a fiery trail through the sky and landed on the ground and exploded and set a forest on fire there. I mean, it didn't just go through the sky to look at it. It actually made contact with the Earth and started a fire, a fairly big one.
It sounds like Tunguska, like the Tunguska event of 1908.
Well, yeah, not quite as big as that, but what I think is that happening, we may already be seeing some particles being sucked our way from all of these things that are floating in our direction. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, back to the whole pole shift thing, which I think is so important, Stan Deyo showed us an experiment that he was working on. He has kind of a little lab downstairs in his basement. And you guys probably already know about this, but maybe some of our listeners wouldn't know. If you take a length of copper wire and stretch it out and connect it to a car battery or a similar DC voltage source, the wire will momentarily twist in one direction, and then as the voltage stabilizes, it will go back to its normal shape. Well, this has been true for, as long as we've been doing this. It always does it. And a friend of mine out here, Bob Williams, who built the first Terminator robot, is somewhat of a physicist himself. And but yeah, it's called the right-hand rule, he said, that basically the wire always jerks in the same direction. Even if you change the polarity on the battery, it still goes in the same direction. Well, Stan said, as of 3 months ago, when he does that experiment now, and he does it very accurately using mirrors and lasers, he said now the wire is twisting in the other direction, which shows that something has changed.
Yes.
And when I told Bob that, Bob says, "Oh my God."
Magnetic field
of
the Earth.
We've got something going. Yeah. Either that or some kind of gravitational thing is happening. So that's kind of physical proof.
Yeah, I don't understand quite. I didn't get the complete picture of this experiment, but I gather that there's electricity and magnetism are both electrical charge flow in conjunction with a magnetic field will produce the moving or the shoving, the pushing aside laterally of this electric charge path.
Right, it's kind of like the same theory. I mean, we were talking about, how water goes down the drain in one direction in the northern hemisphere and the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere. And it's another kind of physical law.
That's probably related to the Earth's magnetic field.
Most likely.
Yeah, I mean, and what we're seeing here, too, I can show you, you asked about what will happen when this thing sweeps Earth, its tail, its debris, its dust, its rocks, boulders, meteors. What will happen to Earth? Well, we have a record of what happened to Earth. If you go back to Exodus chapter 9, reading from the Complete Jewish Bible again, Adonai the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand toward the sky so that there will be hail in all the land of Egypt, falling on people, animals, and everything growing in the field throughout the land of Egypt. Moses reached out with his staff toward the sky, and Adonai sent thunder and hail. So this is more like electrical. Thunder is created by lightning, or as a generation of electrical discharge creates the sound of thunder. I'll continue. Adonai sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. Adonai caused it to hail on the land of Egypt. It hailed, and fire flashed up with the hail. It was terrible, worse than any hailstorm in all of Egypt since it became a nation. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the hail struck everything in the field, people and animals, and the hail struck every plant growing in the field and broke every tree there. But in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were, there was no hail.
So
now,
this was a micrometeorite storm.
Yeah, I mean, you had electrical discharge sucking rocks down. You had electrical discharges pulling rocks down, and you had fire. It was not ice hail. It could have been ice hail, but more likely rock hail, because the ice would have melted.
Well, one thing that's interesting, I don't mean to butt in too much on,
it's okay,
but I want to say
Revelation.
Go ahead, Ed.
The parallel verses in Revelation.
Because when
I was just saying, you know, we've described so many anomalies in this and that, you know, from the Bible and such. Doesn't that sort of pertain to what's going on now with the Earth? We're seeing
exactly.
some, like we were talking earlier about everything's 100-year record.
That's right.
We're seeing anomalies all over this planet right now that we really haven't really recorded before.
Well, the insects, for example, insect inundations were part of the Exodus, the plagues of Exodus. And Marshall talks about that in his book, the Planet X Forecast, the 2012 Survival Guide. Yeah, and this hail is also described. Now, we can get a better fix on what's going to happen, not by by combining Exodus, the Exodus account of the fiery hail that struck Earth, and the fiery hail that's predicted in the book of Revelation, predicted to come soon. Does anybody have their King James, or I could read it in a complete Jewish Bible? I believe it's Exodus chapter, is it 8? Where it says, fire and hail mingled with blood. Well, that's the same thing as what Exodus said. See, Revelation is Exodus deja vu.
There's actually several passages all through the scriptures that pretty much account the same thing. It's said in different ways. In Malachi chapter 4, Isaiah 24, Isaiah chapter 30, Isaiah 13. I could just go through the laundry list of these ancient prophecies, and they're all basically confirmed in the book of Revelation, just said in a little different way. And also in the book of Enoch. I mean, you go into Enoch 80, it talks about the moon is like, you know, basically acting goofy. It's not appearing when it's supposed to. And then last week we had an article on the internet from, was it Singapore? I'm trying to remember exactly. It's somewhere in Indonesia where they were celebrating Ramadan, and the moon didn't come up when it was supposed to, and they didn't know how to end their celebration. I mean, and that's like big news.
A year ago.
Yeah, and then we had, you know, basically we had done a shoot on the moon in Watchers 2 and showed that it had rotated. Well, there's really more going on than just the moon's rotation. The shadows were off. Its times of rising and setting were different. Where it's supposed to come up on the horizon seems to be different. I mean, it's just, you know, there's some people that believe we may eventually lose our moon entirely if it keeps doing these antics.
Right.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Getting back to
then we just learned, like, just 2 or 3 days ago, Marshall, I think I sent you the link, that NASA was shooting up a satellite. They're going to do kind of like what SOHO's doing to the sun. They're sending up 2 satellites to the moon, and they're putting them in orbit.
Right.
Yeah, they're putting them in orbit over the lunar surface. They're going to orbit only 30 miles off the surface, and they're going to be sending a signal to each satellite. So if the moon does something gravitationally, they can sense that between the 2 satellites and record it. So why are they doing that? They're not talking about the moon. And when we called Griffith Observatory to try to get some information on the moon, they wouldn't speak to us about it. So I think all of those things are really significant.
Same reason they're evacuating the ISS.
Well,
we don't know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something going on there that they're not telling us about. In fact, at ISS, they sent up so many space shuttles with many tons. I remember collecting these obscure articles from the press over the past several years. Many, many tons of equipment were sent up to the space shuttle, and the unlikely excuse was that it was used for repairs. Well, you don't send up, you know, like 50 to 70 tons of equipment for repairs. They were doing something with that space station. Something, and I suspect they would shoot down objects. I don't know. We lost one recently. One
yeah, I mean, we lost shuttles, and yet we were so determined that we continued on with the program, and now all of a sudden they're stopping the shuttle program. I mean, even after Columbia knows they blew up and people got killed, we're really sorry about that, but we got to have the next flight next month. And they continued on, and now all of a sudden the shuttles are no longer usable.
because they know Planet X is coming in, and they are desperate with that International Space Station. That's the real reason. They're desperate to either shoot down these objects. That's what they're doing, is launching a firing platform, probably, to shoot down these objects. Because, look, the ruling elite, these sneaky guys who control all of NASA telescopes and have underground cities where they're going to escape, hopefully secure themselves from this disaster. These men are living on the same planet as we're living on. They don't want to be struck by meteors and asteroids. They don't want to be part of that global disaster. So they're desperate to shoot down these incoming rocks, which are becoming more and more dense objects, asteroids, meteors that are approaching Earth. So that's the whole reason for the ISS and the phony excuse that they're shutting it down for sure, because now it's going to be a firing platform. It's already equipped. That's why.
And the Russian crafts are no longer good.
That is, Soyuz, which goes back to the 60s. I mean, I think it's thin. But, guys, we're clocking down here, and I've got 3 really good questions that came in from the chat room Susan gave me, and she's been asking, okay, when are you going to get them out there, Marshall? And so, all right, Susan, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. You got me. You got me cornered. All right. Now, we have from Mick Outlaw. He said, we still don't know if Elenin itself is 1 or 2 pieces, do we? That's question 1. Number 2 is from Nancy Lalonde. Question, if Elenin disintegrates or explodes, could the remnants be considered the nephews that are supposed to be traveling with the Blue Star Kachina if we go with the idea that Elenin is the Blue Star Kachina? And then finally from Lori Corbett, Jeffries, what if the comet holds together and then reaches the sun, and both combined, could they create a huge electrical charge zapping the Earth? So there's 3 questions on the table. Who wants to go first? Ed?
Okay, I'll go.
Which question? Give us the first question.
Pick your poison, fellas. We got to answer these 3 questions. 1, if it disintegrates, will that be the nephews? I believe so. I think I can take that one on and say, yeah, if it disintegrates, that would certainly be the nephews, because the nephews are not directly related. They're not satellites, in other words, objects that are going to be in orbit around Elenin and directly tied to it. But it could be fragments that are following along. There's imagery that shows other objects on a similar track that are flying kind of like in a formation. Like
in parallel, yeah.
Blue Angels kind of a thing. So they're in formation. That's going. So that there, I got that one for Nancy Lalonde. We have the first one, though, and I think, Ed, this was probably the best for you, is do you think it's in 1 or 2 pieces?
Latest photography shows 1 piece. Even as recently as 2 days ago, they thought it was in 2 pieces. But the latest photography that I saw and was spoken of today said it looked like it was 1 piece.
Okay.
And that's as up to date as we can get on it right now.
All right. Now, let's...
Are there any good photographs of it yet in the past day or so that we can...
Yeah, actually there is. And the comet it's not as bright as it was before. Really, looking at it reminds me more of what it looked like before the coma expanded to the diameter larger than Jupiter. So
I mean, like a couple days ago. I mean, is there anything like today?
That's
and
today.
I also saw. Did you guys hear Richard Hoagland's report on Elenin on Coast to Coast the other night, where he compared it to some kind of second-dimensional object? He said it was triangular. So I went to the actual NASA footage and looked at it myself on the SOHO footage, and there is no such anomaly. It was like 1 frame of it where it was kind of squirting out in like 3 different places, and the next frame after that it was clearly wispy and didn't look anything like that. He just picked a single frame that I think made it look like a spacecraft, but I don't think that's what it is.
Yeah,
sensationalism.
It's sensationalism, and it's like, and also with the imagery, a lot of times you have to factor in. It can take a day or 2 for processing. I find amateur astronomers are much better at getting the stuff up quickly, whereas from the more traditional sources, it's a day or 2. I think they say for image processing, I don't know, I did image processing stuff with Lockheed Martin, a day or 2. No, it doesn't take a day or 2. It takes a day or 2 for intelligence officers to decide whether or not to release it. Let's be honest about that. So...
Well, these photographs were pretty good.
Yeah, they were. It looks like It's
they're not embellished. They really looked good.
They look good, and the object looks stronger than what back when last week when they came out. We had these big glaring headlines. Doomsayers humiliated, and it's turning into a pile of rubble, and it's no problem. You get in and actually read the articles and the sources that they're citing, and they're not saying what the headlines are saying, but the headline spin was really something to just kind of kill interest, which it did to a certain point. But real fast, because we just have a few minutes left here. We got 3 minutes left on the air. And Richard, in terms of the Torah code, all right, we've had a very far-ranging conversation technically with Ed and with John. Now, have you heard something tonight that sheds new light on your Torah code tables?
Well, nothing of this evening yet. I think we're kind of waiting to see what happens to the date that's coming up in September, which is really just about 10 days from now, I guess.
Yeah,
even
the 19th.
Yeah. 26th.
Yeah, well, the 26th is when
Glazerson wrote me.
Yeah.
I just was going to say briefly, Rabbi Glazerson wrote me just a few minutes ago to say he's still in New York, so I can send him a question to see if he's found anything else with that. Now, some of these tables were discovered really quickly, and they haven't been run through Professor Harelick's Monte Carlo experiment. Mm-hmm. Last time I talked to Professor Harelick, when they do a table, and it's really an important one, such as they thought that the Fukushima disaster was a really important table. And he ran it through a million other texts. I mean, if you can imagine. Just to get a p-value, it got 2.5 out of a million, which is like really super significant. And you go, well, how are they getting a million other Hebrew texts? And he said they have a randomizer that takes the whole Torah and continuously just jumbles up the letters in it. And they use that same text over and over up to a million times. And they link up to 1,000 computers to run the tests. I mean, I don't know how they're doing this, but they have lots of ways of getting this stuff checked. I mean, it's phenomenal what they're doing.
Well, we'll have to follow up, but guys, we're out of time tonight. Before we close the show, I wanted to read a little poem that came up on my Facebook page from a fellow by the name of Stuart D. Moore. I thought this was really good. Twinkle, twinkle, little Elenin, how I wonder where you've been. Up above the world so high, gaining brightness in the sky, hurtling through the outer void like a stony asteroid. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, now you're brighter by so far. Elenin, Elenin, now it's clear, you are coming very near. I can see your shape in fact, as I brace for the impact. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I kaboom. So I think that was a fairly good note to leave it on tonight. Guys, this has been a really, really fabulous panel. But tonight, the big kicker is Comet Elenin. I mean, this is a topic that is coming back with a passion. And, excuse me, Bill, we're getting some hiss in the background.
I can hear that too.
Okay.
I don't think.
Did it
I'm
just
not sure
start?
whose phone that is coming from.
Pardon?
Now it's gone.
Now it's gone. Okay.
Excellent.
It's probably my air
Now
conditioning
started.
Aha, all right. All right. Well, first off, since we published our article on Yowza, I put up a substantial article on the Torah code, and we've been following this thing. The interesting part about Comet Elenin right now is that this whole situation is really reminding me a lot of what happened in 2003, but with some very big twists, some very big differences. Back in 2003, that was the Nancy Leader non-event. And, back then it was a very organic stampede. It was principally ginned up by the guy that did Blindsided. Hazelwood was his name. And Mark Hazelwood. And so we had something that kind of started off easy and then built up and then came to a hard crescendo. And then when the non-event occurred, which was, we had published an article with the interview with Zachariah Sitchin on Yowza, and we didn't see it happening back then. But after that, I mean, interest completely collapsed. Now, what I'm seeing with Comet Elenin, I mean, it's like, you know, let's fast forward here a few years, and I'm not seeing the same kind of organic stampede that we saw with the 2003 Planet X non-event. It's a very synthetic stampede. It was something where once the object was announced, you don't have this normal process of people chewing on it and finding it and coming up with their ideas and notions. Literally, it was, you know, comb the waterfront for every kind of off-the-wall idea imaginable and get it out there working, pump it up. So, I mean, what we saw was that everything was really synthetically ginned up. We saw that here. I think that is something that got my attention with this comet more than anything else. That now seems to have died off a little bit, thanks that we have, you know, that they've done this spin with it disintegrating. And a lot of folks just left the topic, principally the looky-loos. But here's a big difference between 2003 and now is that we're not seeing everybody bailing out. What we're seeing are the looky-loos, but I'm seeing that there is a core constituency that is not, you know, being convinced that they need to walk away from this topic right now. They're not buying it, and they're really a little bit angry about it. That's what I see with a lot of folks, that they're really just not happy with it. But what we really need to focus on here is initially exactly where we are with this object, because at this point, the latest imagery I'm seeing, it looks to me like it's reconstituting. Ed, you've been following it most closely, so I'm going to throw this initial question at you, what you're seeing for the current status of Elenin.
Well, it looks like, well, it's there. Whether it had broken up, and I guess the technology does say it can pull itself back together and reconstitute itself, especially since the pieces would continue on the original orbital path. But the latest pictures we have, there's some even I saw from today, if I unverified, but and it looks like it's there.
It looks like it's there. You know, I read on September 3rd, Leonid Elenin did publish an article on it, and I thought there was a lot of useful information there, actually. You know, what he was saying is, first off, Elenin, and he does it, it's really interesting, he puts up a table and says, well, the comet's really not in a particular spot in the system where it would be inclined to disintegrate, as other comets would, coming a little too close to the sun. And it's just off into a more benign zone. Doesn't go into any depth on that. That was the one thing I noticed. The other thing is that I've watched him in his threads, discussion threads, and the one question that really he's having to grapple with, and you get to understand this even more clearly when you start doing, you take the Russian language posts and run them through Google Translator. And so when he's getting questions in Russian, he's much clearer and in his responses, because obviously it's his native language. Now, what he is saying is that he believes that the comet is disintegrating and that it is going to crumble, but this is a projection. It is an estimate. On the other hand, we have the Minor Planet Center, which on the same day is publishing a new observation notice for Elenin, and added a footnote to the page that I thought was really interesting. I look for those kind of things. Footnotes can really be a great place to bury some interesting tidbits. And in the footnote, it said that there was discordant observations, which is simply saying, hey, people aren't agreeing on what they're seeing. So based on the fact that there's not a universal agreement amongst astronomers as to exactly what they're seeing with the object, then Minor Planet Center said, well, that disagreement, that variance, if you will, substantiated their estimate that the comet was disintegrating. And that is interesting as well for, you know, what it goes. But with that in mind, let me go to John DiNardo. John, what have you seen? Hey, what have you seen on Elenin, current status on this that's caught your attention?
I have to confess I have not been studying it at all. So I would just, I can tell you what I've learned, how comets behave, but regarding Elenin, I think you should speak to the other folks in our assembly here.
Okay. Well, we brought you in, because we want to do Earth changes on this show. And, we'll talk about Elenin in this first half, and then we're going to really get more heavily into the Earth changes, because that is a big priority concern for me. There are things that are going on with shifting weather patterns. We have firestorms in Texas like they've never seen before. Every time you pick on the news, the weather guy's going, well, this is a 100-year event. Everything is a 100-year event. We're having one 100-year event after another, or we're having something that we've never even seen before. And I think that is something we really need to focus on, because that's going to be the greatest impact for people in terms of their survival preparation and planning. Let me go to Richard. Richard, on the Elenin story, have there been any late developments that have been interesting for you?
Well, yeah, as far as the Torah code aspect of it, a few days ago when we heard that the comet might be breaking up, we weren't sure what to make out of that. And I remembered, in the Bible code book that Michael Drosnin wrote that was published in 1997, he had two tables on page 155. The first one said Comet 5772, which is the Hebrew calendar year for 2012. By the way, the year 2012 in the Hebrew calendar starts this month, which is kind of interesting. It says Earth annihilated, but then he says, but where 2012 is encoded, there is also a statement that disaster will be prevented. So then in the second table that said Comet, it will be crumbled, I will tear to pieces, 2012. And I remembered having read that rather cryptic table a long time ago and ran over to the bookshelf, yanked the book out, and sure enough, there it was. We didn't know there would be a comet this year, or that it would be crumbled or be torn to pieces. So then that instigated a process where I contacted the professors and rabbis who are the Torah code experts, that being Rabbi Matityahu Glazerson, as well as Dr. Robert Haralick. Told them what I'd found. I sent them a scan from the book so they could see the table, and so they wouldn't have to go get it out of their library. And in short order, I had new tables on Elenin from Rabbi Glazerson. And the first one he sent me was back on the 23rd of August. Now you have to understand, these tables are generated using computer software, using equidistant letter sequencing out of a 3,321-year-old text, which is pretty unbelievable at times. But his first table had the word Elenin and Nibiru, which is within a few characters of each other. It says under Elenin the star, and then there were two dates. One said 2013 to 2014, and then it said in 2011 to 2012, meaning that it was going to be a little bit in each of those years, or it could be in the overlap between the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian calendar, is the way we're looking at it. So we thought that was interesting and thought, well, maybe it seems that could mean that Elenin is going to be visible this year and into 2012, and Nibiru perhaps in 2013 and 2014. Now, we don't know exactly what it means. We just don't know. So then after that, I got another table that was a bit more descriptive, and Glazerson was really excited and actually called me from New York to say he had found within one of those tables where it said Elenin and Nibiru in 5771, that's this year, the star. He came up with this date, the 20th of Elul, which is in Hebrew, September 19th to the 20th. And he was quick to point out, I don't know what this means. I don't know what the date means. So we're kind of intrigued with that date to see what's going to happen on between the 19th and 20th of September. We just don't know. And then when the comet crumbled, he sent me a new table where he looked that up. And this one was really a big table, and it said, Elenin, to be finished, which is interesting to have all of that in one line. To be finished, will break, broken, the comet star in 5772, and then at the bottom left of the table it says, in the end of days, which is always a rather awesome kind of sentence to have appear in one of these tables. So all I can say is we learn more about these Torah codes all of the time. We don't always know how to interpret them correctly. And sometimes we really think that the Torah codes are mirroring what is out in the press at the time. That it's almost like they're mirroring headlines or what people are talking about or what's on the internet. I still find them very engrossing and quite amazing.
Well, I see that, but when we have the tables, and first off, I want to say to listeners out there, if you, on the episode page for this show, you'll see where it says Comet Elenin link page. There's a link there. If you click on that, that will take you to the link page on Yowza.com. And from there, you'll see the table, the third table Richard is talking about. Just click on that, and it'll increase to full size, and so you can read it. Now, here's the thing that was interesting, and what I want to do is then get Ed to jump in on this in terms of what people are going to see and when they're going to see it. Because right now, what we have is the last update in terms of what is supposed to be visible was Leonid Elenin on the 3rd, and what he said is that amateur astronomers between now and the 26th will most likely be the ones to observe it, and other astronomers. However, a detailed look is not going to happen until the 26th of September when it comes in range of SOHO. So with that, let me go over to Ed. And Ed, in terms of what we're going to see and when we're going to see it, what is it you're finding so far in your research?
Well, I know Mr. Elenin is actually counting on the SOHO satellite to pick it up around September 23rd.
Right.
Which I don't understand if he said it disintegrated, but anyway, he finished his story with that, and that we can expect around the beginning of October, the comet should appear in the pre-dawn sky. He doesn't say if that means we'll see it with the naked eye or not. He didn't elaborate on that. But we entered the danger zone here a few days ago, as you well know. And with Richard, I might bring up the one thing that really throws, I don't know about Mr. Masters, but it really throws me, is